Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are looking at something a little unsettling that's emerging from generative AI. Researchers are starting to call it the artificial hive mind. We're all using these large language models, and they feel, huge and endlessly creative. But if you've ever noticed that the brilliant idea they give you sounds suspiciously like the brilliant idea they gave someone else, well, you're hitting on the core issue.
That's exactly right. And this isn't just about AI being a bit derivative sometimes. We're talking about a deep systemic convergence. So today we're diving into the findings of the huge Infinity Chat study. And its mission was really to try and quantify this homogenization using a massive set of real-world, open-ended user queries.
And that mission feels pretty critical because if all the major AI systems start, singing from the same hymn sheet, we face a real threat to human creativity and intellectual diversity in the long run. So we're going to unpack why these models from different companies, different data sets, are all generating startlingly similar answers. And maybe most importantly, how our own messy, subjective human preferences are exposing a huge flaw in how we're currently evaluating AI.
Exactly. To really get the problem, we first have to look at the limitations of older research. For years, we tested diversity in LLMs using these really narrow tasks. We'd ask them to generate, say, random numbers or a list of fictional names. These tests, they show you the boundaries of what a model can do, but they completely fail to capture the pluralism of how people actually interact with them.
Right. Because when a person asks a model for an idea or a poem, there's no single right answer. You don't want 5 answers that are just mathematically different. You want 5 answers that are creatively distinct and plausible.
And that is the genius of the data set they used here. Infinity Chat. It uses over 26,000 real-world, open-ended user queries from a data set called Wild Chat. These are the messy, organic, high-stakes questions people actually use AI for, where the best answer is totally subjective.
And the researchers even created a taxonomy that shows just how complex our needs are. They organized everything into 6 main categories and 17 subcategories. And if you just glanced at the numbers, you probably think everyone is only asking for creative help.
Well, creative content generation is definitely the biggest slice, making up about 58% of the data set. So think scripts, marketing copy, brainstorming. But what's fascinating is how common the other types of queries are, the ones that demand real divergent thought, the kind of thinking that this hive mind effect should have the most trouble with.
Like what?
Well, analytical and interpretive questions made up almost 23%. And then you have these highly abstract, speculative, and hypothetical scenarios clocking in at 22%. These things require the model to synthesize information and project possibilities, not just, rehash a summary.
Okay, so give us some concrete examples. What does an open-ended query really look like in this context?
Sure. So in the brainstorm and ideation category, you might get a prompt like, suggest a feature for a smartwatch designed specifically for senior citizens. That could have hundreds of perfectly valid answers.
Or something like from the ambiguous everyday category. How can I live on $1,000 per month?
Yeah,
That's so dependent on context, culture, geography.
exactly. And my personal favorite from the speculative category, what would happen in the morning if gravity on Earth doubled overnight? So answering that means thinking about physics, biology, infrastructure. It's a huge cascade of ideas. And if every model just gives you the same 5 consequences, we've got a serious problem.
Okay, so let's unpack that diagnosis. The study tested over 70 LMs, and the findings point to 2 distinct and pretty alarming symptoms of this artificial hive mind. Symptom number 1 is intramodel repetition.
Right. This is basically mode collapse within a single system. For anyone who doesn't follow this stuff closely, mode collapse just means the model gets stuck. It generates a really narrow set of answers from its massive potential output space, repeating ideas even when you're trying to push it to be more creative.
And they really did try to push it, didn't
Yeah.
they? They didn't just take the default output. They used these high stochasticity decoding parameters, high temperature, high top PO, which are specifically designed to inject maximum randomness.
That's right. They were dialing the randomness knob all the way up. They sampled 50 different responses for every single query, and then they calculated the semantic similarity between all of those responses.
So even when they maxed out the randomness settings, trying to force the model off script, it just snapped back to the same ideas.
That is precisely what happened. The result was staggering. In 79% of cases, the average similarity among responses from the same model was over 0.8. A score of 0.8 is considered extremely high. It basically means the responses are interchangeable in meaning, even if the wording is a little different. The models are just failing to be unique, even when you're screaming at them to do it.
That failure within a single model is worrying enough. But the second symptom, intermodal homogeneity, that's arguably the one that should worry businesses and creatives the most. This means the problem isn't just in one model. It's happening across different LLM families, different sizes, even from rival companies.
Yes. Across all these different model families, open and closed source, the average pairwise similarity between their responses ranged from 71% to 82%. That suggests that the entire creative output of the whole AI ecosystem is, well, it's converging.
Wait, hold on. If these are models from different companies, maybe with different architectures, how could they possibly converge on the exact same creative motto or description? Are they all just drinking from the same digital well?
In essence, yeah. While their proprietary training sets are different, the massive publicly available data they all draw from, like the common crawl of the internet, it contains these really dominant linguistic and conceptual patterns. And when you optimize a model for plausibility, it's naturally going to prioritize the patterns it sees the most.
And that verbatim overlap, that's a huge problem for anyone trying to use these tools to stand out. The study actually points to cases where models asked for a motto for a social media page about success and wealth return the exact same phrase: empower your journey, unlock success, build wealth, transform yourself.
Think about that. If you're an entrepreneur using AI to draft your unique selling proposition, and you get the identical output as a dozen competitors using a totally different AI, your unique idea is dead on arrival.
It also completely undermines the idea of using multiple models to get diverse results, right? If we're all just pulling from the same convergent ideas, mixing them up won't help.
Absolutely. The problem isn't just word-for-word repetition. It goes deeper. It's conceptual.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the idea of a semantic collapse, which shows the hive mind is deep, not just superficial.
This is where it gets really fascinating.
Mm.
They moved beyond simple descriptions and started testing abstract philosophical concepts. They used this great example, the query, write a metaphor about time.
So they analyzed responses from 25 different models, generating over 1,000 unique phrases. And what they found was that these outputs all collapsed into just two tiny semantic clusters.
Only two main ideas from 25 powerful AIs and hundreds of responses. What were they?
The overwhelmingly dominant one, I mean, the vast majority of all responses, was the time is a river metaphor. You see things like time is a river, endlessly flowing, carrying moments like leaves.
Which is probably the most classic, most repeated metaphor for time in Western culture.
Exactly. And the second, much smaller cluster was time is a weaver. Time is a silent weaver, meticulously threading moments. But what's really critical here is that they tried to nudge the models. They paraphrased the prompt slightly to try and force a different result. And the semantic similarity barely changed. The difference was a tiny 0.04.
Wow. So that tiny difference proves that no matter how you ask the question, the model is trained, or maybe aligned, to snap back to the most statistically probable concept. It's choosing efficiency over actual novelty.
And this convergence on dominant ideas, which are often Western-centric, given the training data, that's where the big societal risk comes in. If the AI always defaults to the lowest common denominator, it risks suppressing other cultural worldviews and basically homogenizing human expression on a global scale. We're kind of engineering a decline in conceptual diversity.
Which makes the whole problem less about the models themselves and more about how we're judging them. If there's no single right answer, how do these systems even decide what a good response looks like? This gets us to pluralistic alignment and why the current ways we evaluate AI are failing.
To test this, the researchers did this monumental human annotation effort. They collected over 31,000 individual judgments with 25 independent annotators for every single example. They needed that density to capture what they called distributional human preferences, basically the huge range of weird, idiosyncratic tastes people have.
Okay, so when you give humans two high-quality but really different answers to an open-ended question, what do? Did they agree on which one was better?
They disagreed wildly. A lot. The human preference data had a high Shannon entropy, and Shannon entropy is just a mathematical way of measuring uncertainty or lack of consensus. It means that while the annotators might agree both answers were good, they completely diverged on whether answer A was better than answer B, which is just the nature of taste.
That makes perfect sense. My idea of a good poem might be totally different from yours, but both poems could still be high quality.
Precisely. But the AI evaluation systems, the reward models used in training, the AI judges, they were all trained assuming there's a consensus. They're built on things like reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF, which tends to reward the output that gets the highest average score, not the one that sparks the most interesting debate.
So how did these consensus-seeking AIs do when they were faced with that human chaos, with the high entropy, high disagreement responses?
They showed a critical calibration failure. Their correlation with average human ratings just dropped. It dropped significantly when they were looking at two specific types of responses. First, ones that humans thought were of similar quality, and second, ones where humans disagreed a lot.
That is profound. It means that if two generated answers were both excellent and equally valid, the reward model, the very thing that steers the AI toward good behavior, couldn't see them as equally good. It would just arbitrarily pick one as better, even if humans were split 50-50, and then it reinforces that single path.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of uniformity. The current alignment pipeline, because it's looking for a single consensus idea of quality, it fails to reward or even recognize the value of diverse, equally valid responses. And if the system can't see the value in diversity, it just stops generating it. It pushes every model toward the safest, most statistically probable answer.
Which brings us right back around to the artificial hive mind. It's robust. It shows deep repetition inside single models. It fails to generate diversity even when you force it. And it shows startling convergence across the entire industry on creative tasks.
Right. And we now have strong empirical evidence that relying on these systems risks propagating uniformity. Uniformity in language, uniformity in thought patterns on a massive scale. It threatens genuine creativity, and it risks suppressing non-dominant cultural views. But these findings also give us a foundation to start designing ways to fight back against this mode collapse.
So as you, the listener, turn to these tools for brainstorming or writing, you have to recognize that the ideas they're giving you are often the easiest ideas. They're the most statistically probable ones, not necessarily the truly novel ones that drive human innovation. And this whole deep dive really forces us to ask a fundamental question about where AI development goes from here.
The data shows us pretty clearly that the path of least resistance leads straight to uniformity. It traps LLMs in the most common conceptual ruts. So the artificial hive mind forces us to ask, do we design AI to prioritize efficiency and consistency, to always snap back to that time as a river metaphor? Or do we dedicate serious resources to complex training strategies that explicitly value and reward diversity, novelty, and, the acceptance of pluralistic human taste?
What kind of creative and cognitive future do we really want to build with these technologies? That is certainly something to ponder and maybe something to challenge your favorite LLM on long after this deep dive ends.